I'm Nicole Jabot from West Hartford Bloomfield Health District. I'm the Environmental Health Program Coordinator here. We're just going to do a quick presentation on food safety for the holidays. Basically, the CDC defines 4 steps to food safety, so we're kind of going to go along that line. Clean, separate, cook, and chill are the most important things you want to be aware of. So we'll start with clean. We want to always start clean, which means washing your hands before you touch anything, before you touch raw food, before you touch ready to eat food. You've probably just come into the room from somewhere else, so you want to start with washing your hands. Want to wash for at least 20 seconds with soap and warm water before, during, and after preparing food and before eating, which I know most of us know to wash before eating, so we've already got that going for us. You always want to wash your hands after handling uncooked meat, chicken, other poultry, seafood, flour, or eggs. And this is because of cross-contamination, which we'll kind of discuss in one of the next slides. You don't want to cross-contaminate germs from raw foods with ready-to-eat foods. Ready-to-eat foods are something you're going to take directly out of packaging and put right in your mouth. You want to wash your utensils, cutting boards, and countertops with hot soapy water after preparing each food item. And that's basically the same reason where you need to wash your hands, is to prevent those germs from contaminating the things you're going to eat without cooking. So separate and don't cross-contaminate when you're grocery shopping. So before you start the whole process of even cooking, you want to keep your raw meat, poultry, seafood, and any of their juices away from the other groceries, because we don't want that cross-contamination. One example, when we actually do health inspections at restaurants and commercial entities, we will always have them put the eggs on the bottom shelf, because eggs are so easily broken, they can drip, they can contaminate anything that's below them, so it's always eggs on the bottom shelf, which is a good rule to follow at home also. You want to keep raw marinating meat, poultry, seafood, and eggs separate from all other foods in the refrigerator. Personal story I have is my mother one time had put a steak defrosting in the refrigerator above a cheesecake with cherry topping on it. So we didn't know that the meat juice, the raw beef juice, was actually leaking into the cheesecake with the cherries. Let's see. You want to use one cutting board or plate for raw meat, poultry, all seafood, and a separate cutting board or plate for produce, bread, and other foods that won't be cooked. So those are your ready-to-eat foods: produce, bread, and then anything else that I had mentioned before. Again, this is to prevent cross-contamination. Restaurants will often do this. They'll have color-coded cutting boards. One is going to be for meat, one is going to be for ready-to-eat stuff, and you're going to have your separate cutting boards for any raw and then any like lettuce or salad products that you're going to eat right away. We're going to cook. For our cooking step, we always want to cook to the right temperature. Food is safely cooked when the internal temperature gets high enough to kill the germs that make you sick. And how do we know that the temperature is high enough? You want to use a food thermometer, specifically a food thermometer. And we'll talk about that in a second. Color and texture are not reliable indicators if your food has been cooked to the safe temperature. An example, we have steak or hamburger patties. You might want your steak medium rare, same thing with your hamburger. Just because it's pink doesn't mean it's not done, it's not safe, but that's why the color and texture are not always reliable. You may have gotten to that high enough temperature, but it's still pink and it's safe to eat. So safety versus doneness, looking for visual signs of doneness could create overcooked food. So if you cook that food, if you cook that meat, that steak or that hamburger patty to death, basically, so that it's totally brown, you might have overcooked it and you might not have had to do that. Cooking to the recommended temperatures keeps food safe and retains the quality. So now we'll go in a little bit about thermometers. There's basically two different types that you're going to see. We have a digital thermometer. This is what we use for restaurant health inspections when we do them. It has a thin probe, so you're going to be able to get it into meat that's thin, like a steak or a hamburger patty. It's going to give you an instant read on the temperature. You don't have to sit there and wait for it to go up, and you're not really sure. In the meantime, your food is cooling down while you're waiting for the temperature to actually register. So I would highly recommend digital, which you can get at any like Bed Bath & Beyond or Walmart, or you can pretty much get these anywhere. The second is a dial thermometer. We do see these in restaurant inspections, but these are the ones that you're going to probe and you're going to have to sit there and wait for the temperature to register. So not ineffective, but not really ideal either. And so yes, we want to use the digital thermometer. Again, when we cook, how do we take a temperature with this digital thermometer we're using? Temperature should be always taken in the thickest part of the food. So we want to take it, for instance, right here in the breast, because that's going to be your densest and thickest part of the food. You also want to try to probe down as much as you can to make sure that you're getting an internal temperature like in the center to make sure that everything is cooked fully through. For turkey specifically, since Thanksgiving is coming up, we want to take our temperatures in 3 places. Again, we want to take it in, I guess this is the breast. Consider the breast here. The thickest part of the breast, where the body and the thigh join, we also want to take a temperature. And we also want to take one in between the body and where the wing join. Stuffing. A lot of people do not realize this, but you should always check the final cooking temperature of your stuffing, because just because that turkey is cooked to 165 and may be safe doesn't mean your stuffing is at 165. So you always want to take that temperature of the stuffing. You can probe it when it's in the turkey, but I recommend taking it out and then probing it to see if it's safe. If it's not, you can always throw it in a pan, throw it back in the oven, and keep warming it up. Yep, so we mentioned it might not reach the same temperature. For cooking, what temperatures are safe? I definitely don't expect everyone to remember all the temperatures that I'm going to go through here. But you can easily find charts on FDA's website, USDA's website, that will kind of give you all the examples of temperatures and what foods you need to cook to those specific temperatures. Whole cuts of beef roasts and briskets can actually be cooked to lower temperatures than some other things, but you need to have a 3-minute rest time with that. So 145 degrees is safe for thick roast, veal, pork, but you have to give it that rest time in order to keep cooking and get up to a good enough temperature to kill the bacteria. What that temperature is exactly, the FDA doesn't seem to say. It's just this is the guideline, so we try to go by that. For fish, also 145. It would be a whole fish, so generally it's going to be mostly the same temperature, so you can do 145, or until it's opaque, you can also do. For ground meats, it's a little bit different. We want to cook anything ground to 160 degrees, and this is because ground meats are also referred to what's called comminuted. You could have different cuts of meat, even from different animals, that are getting ground and mixed into the same thing. So you could have a contaminated piece from one animal and then the rest is safe, but it's still going to get mixed in. So you want to make sure you're cooking to that 160 degrees because that's safe, the safe temperature. All poultry, always going to be 165 degrees. Leftovers, again, we want 165 degrees. Your leftovers, maybe they've been sitting around, you finished dinner, you haven't quite cleaned up yet because you want to visit with your family. It's best to then cook them to 165 because we also want to refrigerate them within 2 hours of cooking. So if we haven't refrigerated them within those 2 hours, at least we know we can reheat them to 165 and most likely kill the bacteria. One thing we recommend to our restaurants, and is a common practice, they divide large dishes into smaller portions to cool more efficiently. So say you have a big bowl of mashed potatoes. You might want to divide that into smaller containers, or you want to divide it into shallow containers so that it's spread across more of an area and will cool down faster. I usually would recommend like a metal container, but even if you have like a stoneware container, it's gonna cool faster than plastic. Plastic tends to hold in that heat a little bit more. It's perfectly fine to leave it uncovered when you're cooling, even in your refrigerator. I would recommend leaving it uncovered so it cools a little faster, and then cover it up a little bit later. Oops, I missed something here. Nope. Cookie dough. Say no to raw dough and batter, which really hurts my feelings, but unfortunately, raw eggs can contain salmonella, and we all know chicken, eggs, salmonella seems to be the most common virus or bacteria that everyone knows about. Raw flour can also contain germs like salmonella and E. coli. So, what if you use pasteurized eggs? Can you eat the dough then? No, because you still have raw flour. And the reason for that is that the flour has not been heat treated to kill these germs. It can be ground, it can be bleached when you get your flour, but it's not necessarily heat treated. It's not safe to just eat it raw. What about edible cookie dough? These doughs are made with pasteurized and heat treated ingredients. So those little containers of edible cookie dough, there's a temperature danger zone. So this is kind of what you want to be aware of to make your food safe. We want to keep our food away from this danger zone of 140 to 40 degrees. Above here, you have all your temperatures where you're going to be cooking your foods to keep them safe. When you're in this danger zone and temperatures are hovering around here, that's when your bacteria and viruses are going to start to grow. Once we're down to 40, which is normally your refrigeration temperature, that growth is going to slow, and you're not going to get as much, you're not going to get those pathogens that are going to make you sick. Bacteria multiply rapidly when left in the danger zone. So we're going to want to break down that food into small quantities and package in shallow containers like I had mentioned before. That's going to help get your temperature down faster. You should refrigerate perishable food within 2 hours. Going back to when we spoke about leftovers, you should really have those in the refrigerator within 2 hours. When we visit restaurants and we observe cooling in a restaurant, the rule of thumb is you must go from 135 degrees down to 70 degrees within 2 hours, and then you need to go from that 70 degrees down to 41 within 4 hours. So you do have a 6-hour window to cool your food within, but we want to make sure those initial 2 hours that we're getting that high temperature way down, and then that we're also continuing to slowly lower that temperature in 4 more hours to your refrigeration temperature of 41 degrees. Keep your refrigerator at 40 degrees or below and your freezer at 0 degrees or below. We'll talk a little bit about thawing also, especially, if we're going to be thawing turkeys, we're going to be thawing roasts coming for Christmas time. You have 3 options for proper thawing. One is in the refrigerator. I think this is probably the most commonly used that we know of. This is what I would recommend. This is how I thaw my food. It might take a little bit longer, so just plan ahead, but it is probably the best way to do this. You can cool in cold water. I do not recommend this one quite as much because you have to be very vigilant with it. You need to make sure you're changing your water every 30 minutes. And you need to make sure you're checking that temperature if you want to be sure that you're keeping your food safe. So you can do just standing water, a sink full of standing water, a bowl full of standing water. Obviously you want to package whatever you're thawing in a leak-proof plastic. Container is not going to work as good, but if you have like a plastic Ziploc, that would work best. And then you're going to change that out every 30 minutes. You can also use running water, which we see in restaurants, and that water is going to need to be kept around 70 degrees in order to thaw safely. So a little bit of a tedious method, and that's why I wouldn't recommend. In the microwave, probably the second most popular, I would say. Another safer method of doing it. These 2 in the refrigerator and in the microwave are probably the 2 best ways that you can thaw food. And that's actually all I have. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
I have a question that I hope I didn't miss it. So when you have food and you've cooked it and it's still hot and you put it in the packaging that maybe it's in a container, whether it's glass or plastic.
Yep.
If you put it in too soon while it's hot into the refrigerator, does it create a problem for the food in the refrigerator, or do you wait until it's cool and then put it in?
It can, sort of slowly raise that temperature in your refrigerator, and it could affect the foods around it. So I would probably say, maybe leave it on the counter for a little bit so it gets that steam stops coming out and it kind of cools. Because you have until it gets to 135 degrees, that's when the clock starts. So you can definitely leave it out for a little bit, let all that heat bleed off, and then put it in the refrigerator.
A lot of times people get rotisserie chickens and they leave them on the counter for a while because they come hot.
Yep.
But then again, so you have to retest that. You have to check the thermometer, check the temperature. If it's more than 2 hours, do you want to check it or no? That bacteria is already starting to form.
Once you so if you take the temperature and it's at 135 degrees, that's when you know, okay, I have to do something at this point. If it's hotter, you don't have to worry about it. But if it's on the counter at 135, then you want to think about refrigerating it. You still have that 2 hours, really, before you're going to get a lot of bacteria and growth in it. So technically, you could leave that chicken on the counter for 2 hours. Yeah, you would have to check it again, and it would have to be down to 70 degrees. That's that. If I can go back to that slide, maybe the temperature zones. Yeah, so anything. This is 140, but with the FDA code, it's now 135. So that's kind of where everything starts. So then your 2 hours, you want to have, let's see, 40. Probably want to have half of it, your 2 hours, but then you want to, oops, I'm not going to touch that. Then you want to start getting it down to that 40 degrees in 4 hours. So you have a lot of time to get it down to that's when you'd want to put it in the refrigerator. Once it hits 70 degrees, don't wait anymore. Put it in the refrigerator. So I hope that answered your question.
About desserts, have any desserts with
It depends on what's in it. If you have a cheesecake, like that's probably going to be still potentially hazardous. You're going to want to refrigerate that kind of within the same. I mean, you're not really going to serve it like hot, hot, so you're probably already going to be at that 70 or below. But I would definitely get that back in the refrigerator within like the 2 hours. Stuff like cakes and cookies, they don't, since they're cooked already, they don't really have that same potential to be hazardous. So like pies, cakes, cookies, again, depending on what the ingredients are. If there's eggs in it, but you've cooked it, then it's basically okay after that. Trying to think of another example, but stuff that has dairy that's not like solidly cooked, you're probably going to want to refrigerate that stuff. Hmm?
So the different methods for defrosting food, one method of the recommended
Yeah.
for most when you're cooking to defrost frozen shrimp is under cold running water.
Yep.
So it's gonna sound crazy, but so say you have the shrimp and it's in a colander and it's raw. You're putting the water, cold water, or it's in a bowl. Does the entire sink then have the potential to be contaminated and you have to scrub it down? The same with
Yeah.
defrosting chicken.
In restaurants, they have three basins where they do wash, rinse, sanitize. So if they're going to use that sink to do something else, like thaw out a chicken, they still have to sanitize that whole bay of the sink before they use it again.
Our kitchens
You really should, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions from anyone? Okay, thank you very much.
Great job.
So we're going to just take a quick little break here. I'm going to switch over with. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay. All right, so good evening, everybody. My name is Melissa Marquis. I'm the Emergency Response Specialist for the West Hartford Bloomfield Health District. So I'm going to kind of switch gears a little bit now that Nicole's talked about the food side and keeping you safe at home, preparing your lovely Thanksgiving meals with your families. I'm going to talk a little bit more on how to keep yourselves safe throughout the winter season. And so we're going to cover a bunch of different topics. So I know this slide might be a little bit difficult to read, but basically it's just highlighting lots of different things that you might want to think about and consider as we enter the winter season. And we're going to touch on many of these, so it's okay that if you can't read it. But just as it is important to change your batteries in your smoke detector or your carbon monoxide detector, twice a year when the seasons change, we all basically really want to make sure that you're taking that opportunity to prepare for the upcoming season. And so for us, that means winter, now that we've just entered daylight savings time, much to our chagrin. And so we want to make sure that you're thinking forward about the winter and what does that mean in terms of preparing your house and making sure that you've got all the right necessary things within your home, have your shovels ready, your snow melts, that you've got enough oil or gas in your furnace for your heat source. So a bunch of those different items, and like I said, we'll touch through some of them. I did want to run through some cold weather tips in case you weren't aware. So obviously when it's cold you want to put more layers on, right? So that's just common sense. But it's easy to kind of get a little bit complacent in terms of, if I'm just running out to the car real quick, I'm only going to be outside for 2 seconds. But, just consider, we just had some fresh snowfall last night and I didn't get a chance to go out and, salt the ground. And so what happens if you slipped and fell while you run out to the car to get something without a coat or without proper shoes, and then you can't get up and you're outside with no phone? You just kind of try to think about all the sort of what-if scenarios that can happen and just try to prevent as many of those from happening as possible. So just kind of be forward-thinking. So when you're going out in the cold weather, you want to protect, obviously, your ears, your face, hands, and feet. Particularly, those are the most vulnerable to very cold temperatures. Those are the areas that are most likely to develop frostbite if you're out in the cold for prolonged periods of time. And then also, about 40% of heat loss occurs from your head for everybody, even women with long hair and thick hair. So if you're not protecting your head by wearing a hat outside, chances are you're going to lose a lot of your body heat just by being outside for a little bit. So you just really want to make sure that, again, you're thinking through all this stuff. Anytime you're wearing your boots, obviously you want to make sure if you're going to be outside shoveling or snow blowing and there's a lot of snow, try to make sure that they're waterproof, and if not, then wear a couple of layers of socks. That will help to prevent some of that extreme cold. You have a good amount of blood supply in your distal extremities, but once it's cold, your blood vessels constrict, and so they actually reduce the amount of blood flow to those areas to try to keep the center part of your body warm, so all the blood flow just kind of comes up. So you want to really keep those nice and warm. All right, so, and then hopefully you picked up on this last one, so keeping your cell phone with you outside. So like I said, even if you're just running to the car, if you know that there might be some hazards outside, it might just be a good idea to take it, especially if you live alone and there's nobody around to hear if you fall and get hurt and can't get up. So I know it might sound a little overkill, but it's just good practice, I think. So can you spot the differences between frostbite and hypothermia? So there is a difference. Frostbite is something that, I mentioned before, it's most likely going to happen to those distal extremities. So anything on the face, the ears, the nose, the hands, fingers particularly, and your toes particularly. So I don't have a slide or any graphics on here in terms of the time frame that it would take for that exposure to create frostbite. But I suspect, Nicole, you go outside all the time and ice climb and everything, so you can probably speak to that a little bit better, but I imagine that it's a very short period of time if you're unprotected. If you have no gloves or thin gloves and only a thin pair of boots with thin socks, within a half an hour you're going to be really cold and starting to suffer a bit. So just pay attention to a lot of redness in your hands, pain and tingling sensation. Those are all clues that your circulation is compromised and that you really should try to get the opposite. You want to slowly warm them because, like I said, when you're very cold, the blood vessels in your fingers, those capillaries, they're really tiny, and when those constrict and then suddenly they're exposed to hot temperatures, they're going to expand and all the blood's going to try to rush right back down, and it's going to cause problems and extreme pain and potential issues that you don't want to deal with. So go slow. You can use a heating pad or other source of heat. I would probably, it says you can use a radiator. I certainly wouldn't touch the radiator because that's going to hurt really bad. And if you're already feeling that tingling sensation, that means that your sensation's already compromised. So if you then go and touch something hot, you might not notice how hot it actually is. So you could develop burns on top of it. And so it's just be careful. And don't massage because that can also cause some issues. Now moving over to the hypothermia side. So this is when your body temperature goes below roughly about 95 degrees or so. So that's the danger zone. Now granted, there are some people who run normally a low body temperature. My mother's one of them. She always has a temperature of 95 no matter if it's 90 degrees outside. That's just her. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but typically if somebody's shivering and super cold, their lips are blue, their fingernails are blue, those are all signs that they are way too cold and their body is not getting enough oxygenated blood, basically. And so you, again, need to rapidly move them inside into somewhere warm, lots of heat. If they happen to be wearing like clothing that's wet, or maybe they were outside shoveling and they got sweaty, when they come inside, their clothing's probably a little bit damp. That cold, damp material on their skin is going to actually increase that evaporation and that heat loss even more. So really need to make sure that they're out of wet clothing. You can maybe draw them a warm, like a lukewarm bath, if they're really that cold, just to slowly warm them up. But I'd start with the hands and feet first, probably. Put on layers, lots of layers. Give them something warm to drink. So warm tea or warm milk or just warm water, something warm so that it starts to warm from the inside out as well. All right, and then for first aid, so we talked a little bit about some of these. There is a possibility if somebody's been outside for a prolonged period of time, let's say they slipped and fell, and again, nobody noticed, there's nobody around to see them, and they were outside for hours, you can actually slip into a coma and die if that is a very prolonged period of time, and also depending on what their health status is. So it can be a very dangerous situation. So if somebody's exhibiting decreased consciousness, or they're slurring their words, and they're just not responding to all the tips that we've just walked through to warm them up, I'd consider bringing them to the hospital or calling 911 to get them proper treatment. They can insert IVs and infuse warm saline to warm them up, again, from the inside out. All right, snow removal. So we talked a little bit about this already, and I don't want to use the 4-letter S word, but it is winter, or coming up soon. So again, obviously you want to make sure that if you're going out to do either shoveling, snow blowing, or any kind of playing in the yard with your kids, doing snow angels, make sure that you're warm, you're dressed appropriately, and you're not staying out for prolonged periods of time. As soon as your clothing gets wet, go inside and change. Put on new, dry, warm clothes. Okay, particularly for snow removal, it's important to just kind of limber up a little bit. Get your muscles flowing, get the blood flow throwing throughout your body. It'll help to prevent some injuries from that repetitive motion, especially if you've got a long driveway or a big area to remove snow. And keep in mind, snow can weigh up to about 25 pounds if it's that real heavy, wet snow. And so, you're constantly doing this motion. If you're not using proper body mechanics and you've got 25 pounds on repetitively, you're at an increased risk of doing some injuries or experiencing an injury. So you want to make sure that you're taking frequent breaks, that you are using the right type of equipment for you, for your body type, for your height. And so those are all things that you can do now to prepare ahead of time to make sure that you've got the right equipment. In terms of actually shoveling, it's better if you can push it rather than lift it. Obviously, that's a little bit safer in terms of injuries. But if you do have to lift it, make sure that your back is straight and you're bending with your knees and you're using your legs to do the heavy lift and work. And then just turn your whole body instead of just going like that, because you're going to wrench your back. All right. Stay hydrated, maybe some warm tea. And then obviously a snowblower is the best, but you have to be very careful with snowblowers because obviously you can get, if there's snow stuck in there, you turn it off. Snowblowers have a tendency to almost like backfire. It's probably not quite the right word to use, but they can kind of kick back on when you think that it's other appendages. So it is dangerous, and so you really need to make sure that you understand the equipment before you're using it. With either snowblowing or shoveling, heart attacks are probably one of the more common issues or problems that can happen. I think there's a statistic here. They did a study recently that said heavy snow of about 7 to 8 inches increases the risk of heart attacks among men by 16% and 34% increased risk of dying from a heart attack. So that's really significant. And I have personal history with this. I lost an uncle to this a number of years ago, and he was totally healthy and fine beforehand. And so you just never know. So again, really try and make sure that you're aware of all this. You're taking those frequent breaks. If you notice any symptoms of chest pain, chest pressure, dizziness, shortness of breath, extreme sweating, even though you're out working and exercising, doing this work, really take time. Go inside, sit down, warm up a little bit, reassess how you're feeling. And if it's not passing or it's getting worse, call 911. Don't wait. Don't ignore it. So just a couple of quick little tips here on preventing falls. So we like my little pictures here to walk like a penguin. So I think it's obviously really important to make sure that you are monitoring the type of, how the ground surface is. You know, was there a recent snowfall that you haven't cleared yet? Has it refrozen overnight? Maybe you cleared it yesterday and then it melted a little bit and then it refroze. So looking for that sheen on the pavement, looking for any signs that, you know, there might be some black ice or something. So making sure you're doing all those preventative steps before you actually get out. So my recommendation is to, you know, before you take that first step, just take your foot and just kind of rub it over the surface of the ground in front of you lightly. Don't do it hard. Don't put your weight on it because then you may just slip and fall. But if you do it gently and just to see is your foot sliding more than it should, then I would consider that that's probably a slick condition. And so the best way to prevent yourself from falling is to maintain your center of gravity. So if you just kind of take that little shuffled gait and pretend you're a little, 90-year-old lady with your cane or your walker, going real slow, because you're keeping that mass over the center of your legs. If you're taking big, wide steps, and you're in a hurry and you're going, you're much more likely to slip. All right, so just keep that in mind. All right, so a little bit more on the preparedness side. So this is a nice little tip of just general emergency preparedness. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's specific to winter, but these are some questions that I'd like you to, in your mind, think through. Do you have a go kit or a bag at home that contains specific items to help you in an emergency situation? Let's say you lose power for 2 weeks. Do you have things in that bag that would help you to be able to stay at home for as long as you can? You might not be able to stay there for the full 2 weeks if you're without power, but you might be able to stay for a few extra days. If you or somebody you live with has what we call access and functional needs, so people that have difficulties navigating their surroundings. Maybe they're blind, maybe they're deaf, maybe they have a physical ailment that they need to use, a cane, a walker, crutches, some sort of a assistive device to help them, and ask if they have a registry of those types of individuals that might need a little bit extra support in the event of an emergency. And really we're looking at those people that maybe have high medical needs where they need electricity for medications, for oxygen, for ventilators. So there's a lot of different things that we need to consider. And so the more we know about our residents at the town level will be helpful for us to prioritize them where we can in an emergency and try to send somebody out to their house if they have, like I said, that prolonged outage or something. If you take medications, do you have enough medications on hand to last you for several weeks or maybe even longer if pharmacies are closed? Do you have enough gas in the car or extra gas or oil for your generator if you use a generator? So these are just some of the different things that I'd like you to consider. There's a whole lot more to consider, and I know that there's a bunch of really good resources up here. So before we close up for the night, there's a bunch of really good resources up here. So before we close up for the night, I want you to come up and take some resources. And there's also a good website called ready.gov, and they have a lot of great checklists and tools out there, resources that will help you build your own kit for your house, and then also one for your car. And so this is actually very important for the winter time, just because cars, you might get into a car accident, you might break down. There's generally a lot more issues that can happen in the wintertime if you are stuck in your vehicle and you can't, it's not safe to get out, or your phone is dead and now you can't call for help, and now your car is also dead, and what do you do? So these are additional items that I would consider keeping in your car during the winter time specifically. So having a small shovel, having an extra blanket, keeping some snacks in there, and then making sure that you've got that half a tank of gas, because that's going to let you at least run for a while if you do get stuck in a big snowbank, or there's a pile up on the highway and you're sitting there for hours because there's nowhere to go. That'll help to roads. People don't have the right tires for the snow, where they have front wheel drive cars, and so their back wheels just kind of keep spinning and spinning. So this will help if you put some down behind the tire and as close to under the tire as you can. That will help the tire obtain some grip and some traction, and hopefully can get you out of that mess. And the shovel could also help if you need to dig yourself out. Making sure that you've got your phone charger with you too, very important. So a couple other tips here for severe winter weather. So we talked a little bit about power outages. Obviously we live in New England and we're not unfamiliar with winter storms and blizzards and ice storms. We know that power outages are likely to occur. So we want to make sure that you're ready. So having flashlights with spare batteries that are new, replace them every year because batteries expire. So the worst thing is you lose power and then your batteries are dead. So where possible, avoid candles, but recognizing if you have no other source of light, then that's okay to use. Just be mindful and make sure you monitor that. Carbon monoxide poisoning, we'll talk a little bit more on a separate slide about this, but never, ever, ever, ever use a generator inside your house. Always outside, always away, as far away from the house as possible, not near any open windows, not near the open garage door. Obviously you have to keep it connected to the house, so you're limited in how far away, but because it runs on gas can emit that carbon monoxide, and it is a colorless, odorless gas that if you are exposed to it and you're not picking up on the subtle signs that we'll talk about in a minute, there's a chance that could become catastrophic for you and your family. So similarly, don't bring propane grills inside to cook in the middle of winter when you have no power, because it's the same thing. You're using gas on the inside of the house. It's just not safe. Don't do it. And then in terms of food safety, so sort of this kind of catchphrase that we use, when in doubt, throw it out. So if your power is out for more than a few hours and you're unsure of the temperature in your fridge or freezer, toss the food. Don't take the chance on getting sick and having you or your family members get sick. So we want to make sure that you're considering that as well. And obviously checking on your neighbors. And then there's all-weather radios that are really important. I recommend having at least every house having one. The hand crank ones are particularly good, and they have little solar panels on it. So it's got a built-in flashlight. It's got the weather radio. You can tune to AM, FM stations, so you'll get instant radio stations and news updates through that. And the hand crank will help you maintain use if the battery inside of it dies. So it's definitely a good idea to get one of those. So again, generator safety, like I said, never use it inside. We want to make sure, these are some not to do's, so tips on what not to do when using a generator. So we talked about the first three already. When you are running it, try to run it on dry ground as much as possible. Don't put it in standing water and then plug it in, because it's generating electricity. So that's obviously a conductor. for bad stuff to happen, so don't do it. Make sure that you're going to be plugging it in correctly into the appropriate sized wall sockets. Most generators have, I forget the voltage, but it's a very specific voltage that you need to have plugged in. So, that takes time and prep work before you can actually use it to make sure that it's connected appropriately. If you're going to use a generator, I would recommend having a carbon monoxide detector available and put closest to the area where the generator is, like so if you've got your generator running out through the garage and your entryway from the garage to the house might be to the kitchen, I'd put a carbon monoxide detector in the kitchen, just so that if it's detecting something, you'll hear about it. Okay, so we talked mostly about those. So in terms of what does carbon monoxide feel like? Like I said, it's colorless and odorless, so you're not going to know you're being exposed potentially. Symptoms of CO poisoning: mild headaches, feeling kind of short of breath, so you're just kind of like panting almost, and you're not exerting yourself. You're just sitting there, in the dark maybe, and just not feeling quite right. Lethargic, just feeling a little dizzy, tired, just blah. Those are all clues that you're breathing in carbon monoxide. But unfortunately, they're so subtle, and they happen late. And so oftentimes what happens is people will think, oh, I got such a headache, I'm just going to go lay down. Take some Tylenol and go lay down. And, oh, I'm feeling tired, so maybe I'll just go to bed for the night. And then they don't wake up because they don't know. And so it really can cause some serious damage. So what do you do if you suspect it? Open the doors and get outside immediately. That's the number one thing you can do. Get outside, get away from the source, and as soon as you get outside into fresh air, you're breathing in that air, that oxygen, that normal room air oxygen level. It's going to reduce the carbon monoxide level in your bloodstream, and you'll almost immediately start feeling a little bit better. If you have the ability to turn off stoves, ovens, or whatever the source is, do so, but if it means staying inside longer, I wouldn't worry about it. Just get outside. And then call either poison control, call 911, call Connecticut Natural Gas, somebody to let them know, hey, there might be a gas leak, or we smell we smell gas and we think we've got carbon monoxide poisoning, because you need to be treated for it. So don't take any chances. And obviously, anytime you change your batteries for your smoke detector, change it for the carbon monoxide detector as well. So twice a year, so keep that in mind. And then they need to be installed on every floor of the home as well. Okay, and especially outside of the bedrooms. Talked about staying connected a little bit, so that's that all-weather radio that I was mentioning. That's what one of them looks like. There's a couple of links on here, so some great resources if you want to stay connected with emergency alerts by the town or by the state. So for West Hartford, you can click on this link or go to that link if you want to take a picture of it. If you don't already receive those notifications, you sign up, and basically any type of emergency notification that the town or the state sends out will be funneled through this, and it's called Everbridge. So the state and the town both use that service. They're separate numbers, though, so if you want to get the state one, you have to register for that separate. Okay, so definitely important to do that. Keeps you informed. And then obviously just try to stay as aware of severe weather as possible beforehand. Do your prep work, in the days leading up to it as much as you can. So that means, paying attention to the news, looking at your phone, your weather apps on the phone, looking out for the next 3-4 days. How does the next week look in terms of weather? What do I need to be prepared for? Okay. So it's a lot of information in a short period of time. Not sure how we're doing on time. We've got a few minutes left. So any questions on the emergency preparedness side of things that you can think of? Anything that I wasn't clear on or you want more information about? All right, well, like I said, we've got a lot of resources up front here, so please come take as much as you want so that we don't have to bring it back to the office, and hand it out to your family and your friends. And here's my contact info, so if you have a question, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to provide you some more information. But other than that, thank you for coming out tonight. Hope you guys learned some good information, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Yes.